Hello, everyone. Welcome to Art of the Bay Sessions. Before we get into the interview, make sure you hit that subscribe button to catch future episodes and other fun content. Now let's jump into the interview. Thanks again.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to another edition of Art of the Bay Sessions, where we chat with various artists from the Bay Area. And today we have a good friend of mine, Adrienne, joining us. How are you doing today?
Hi, doing well. Thanks for asking. How are you doing, Fernando?
I am doing very well. It was raining the other day, and I missed that. But other than that, I'm doing okay.
Yeah, we had kind of like a summer spell for a couple of days, and then today was like the total opposite. So that's kind of been like weird weather.
Yeah, I feel like we just had recently like every weather possible where there was like a really windy day, then it was raining, then it was sunny. So it's like we had everything other than snow.
Yeah.
Texas was the one that got all the snow in our favor.
That's right.
But yeah, thank you again for joining us. Before we started recording, it's been probably over a year since we've actually like done your podcast, and it's insane to me like how we're all in this kind of like time warp where it felt like it was a long time ago, but it didn't feel like it was that long ago at the same time, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. The time is just passing in a super weird way where like weeks can go by and you're like, oh, it's already March. Like,
yeah,
where did February go? But then at the same time, you're like, oh, it's only been 3 months since this year started. Like, oh,
yeah. It's weird because I feel like you guys just came back from your trip, and then you and I had scheduled just to go meet up at to get coffee, and then we were just chatting and everything, and that literally felt like, oh yeah, they just literally came back, and now I'm like, oh, that was a year ago already.
That's true. I totally forgot we had met at I think it was like Eon Cafe. Yeah. Oh my gosh. Yeah, that was a year ago.
Yeah, I think it was. I know it was where I think we were briefly chatting in January about like, saying like, oh, I'm glad you're back and we should try to meet up sometime. And good thing we did, because who knew everything that was going to happen in 2020?
That's true. Yeah, that's actually, so it's been a year since we've done our Confessions podcast, but Carl and I have restarted our podcast just to talk about like our traveling that whole year abroad, because we realized that, basically we got back home and then it was like only a month or two and then COVID happened. So we actually never caught up with a bunch of people.
Oh no. Yeah.
So you're like, oh, I guess this would be a really good way to like share the story and the memories and stuff with everyone, since it's not like COVID's going to disappear anytime soon.
Right. No, yeah, I didn't even think about that, because for a lot of us, we're kind of in the same situation where we haven't caught up with friends since then. But in your case, I didn't even think about that, where like you guys had just come back and then probably only had a few months to reconnect with a few friends, but not everybody at the same time.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh man. Well, thankfully we have this where you and I can at least somewhat catch up in a virtual sense.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, yeah, I've actually known you for several years, but I just wanted to make sure that the listeners kind of got like a small recap of like how we know each other, and also like your background and everything. So one of the questions I usually ask folks is if you can kind of provide like a brief timeline of your career, and it could be anything really. It could be either like from your art career, or in general, just like your whole career at this point.
Okay, sure. Yeah, it's related, I guess. But I went to UC San Diego and I graduated with a double major of visual arts with a photography emphasis and economics.
Oh, nice.
Because at the time they didn't have a business program for undergrad. They started it just when I graduated. But yeah, because I had wanted to go to art school, but my folks are kind of like, you should get like a better, like a full, well-rounded university degree.
Oh, right.
So the compromise is for me to go to school, but then major in art still. And because I had looked into art schools, and a lot of them offer basically you take art classes, but you also learn business. And so, which I think totally makes sense, right? And so when I went to school, I was like, well, there's no business program. So the closest thing we have is economics.
Right.
Which is not a fun thing to learn.
It's funny because I was always interested in economics when we briefly had maybe 1 or 2 courses during high school. But yeah, I would imagine that you have a different perspective based on that.
Yeah. I mean, other than sort of like game theory and that sort of business psychology and stuff, like behavioral science, which was pretty interesting. But other than that, it's like not that fun for someone that's more like creative and less, I guess, in like numbers intelligent. Right. Yeah. So that was UCSD, which is where I met Eugenia because I was a roommate with her. And then through Eugenia, we met. So that's a good segue.
I still remember that cold September run that we did back for the hot chocolate run. Like, I think things like that you'll never forget just because of how cold things are.
Yeah, that was like a miserable run despite thinking about, oh, you're running for chocolate and it's going to be amazing. But to get to San Francisco and like run in the dark, like so early in the morning is like not, it's really, I don't miss it.
Yeah. And not only that, we had to like get there by like 4 a.m. and then we couldn't even drive to the actual park. We had to go park at, I think SF State. I can't remember.
A distance.
Yeah. And then take like a bus over to the race and everything. So
yes. Yeah. That was not fun.
Yeah. Definitely something I don't miss.
Yeah, for sure.
Do you remember actually which art schools you were looking at before you made your decision back then?
Expression was one of them for sure because it was local. And I honestly don't remember too much else.
Yeah.
Because my parents were pretty adamant. So I kind of like crushed my dreams.
It's like,
no, I'm kidding.
It's like, oh yeah, that's nice, but you're going to go here.
Yeah. They're like, it would be it's more pragmatic in case, to like fall back on sort of a well-rounded education. And to be fair, like I remember one of the sort of reactions or feedback I got during a interview in my early days was that they were indeed impressed by, my education, but because I didn't have practical like experience, that's always like the catch-22 when you're searching for a job. They're like, oh, but you don't have experience. And you're like, well, that's what I'm trying to get. But yeah, so I do totally understand my parents and like I'm grateful for the experiences that I've had and don't regret it at all. But it's just one of those things you wonder,
Yeah. Speaking of which, like after graduating, like what was kind of like the focus? Like what was the career path at that point with a degree like that to like for people who don't know what that degree kind of like equals to, like what kind of job titles could you kind of like go after at that point?
Good question. My jobs had nothing to do with my major. I think that's always the case, or not always the case, but that's a common occurrence for those who are, wondering about or worried about what you're majoring in. A lot of people do not, necessarily work with or even in the industry, that they major in. But I ended up, because of UCSD sixth college, our sort of core curriculum had to do with culture, art, and technology.
Oh.
And so a lot of the classes I could take that would fulfill like art class requirements were related to technology. So I ended up actually taking quite a bit of like graphic design leaning or like UI UX leaning classes.
Okay.
They weren't technically UI UX classes, because I didn't really exist then.
Right.
But because of that, I ended up doing a lot of stuff on the computer and doing more like graphics. And so even though a lot of my other art classes were like fine art, or actually a lot of film, because UCSD undergrad has a lot of film classes.
Right.
Yeah. So then it ended up giving me sort of this path into computer graphics. And my first like internship was at the Computer Science Center on campus. And then also because I took a couple of programming classes, I kind of want to say it was like slightly influenced by Eugenia, but also just because I knew they were like, it was a practical skill, you know, to like learn programming.
Right.
And so that actually landed my, one of the jobs, my most, I guess, influential or memorable jobs. I ended up getting, I was like hired as an intern of a web designer, even though I didn't have that much experience doing web design,
nice.
But simply because I had like experience understanding like HTML or CSS because of like programming.
Right.
And because they were willing to teach me. And then that basically created this whole career that I have now doing web design, as well as graphic design and stuff. So that was kind of the path that I meandered through.
That's really amazing. Yeah. It's interesting because the more I've gotten to know Eugenia over the years, I think I was under the same assumption that I thought she just went to school for like engineering or whatever you do to become a software engineer. Right.
Right.
And then the more and more like we have like conversations, like I learned so much about how much of an art background she has on top of that. So it's very interesting how I think everyone has a similar kind of thing where they start off somewhere, but they don't know necessarily those skill sets that they're just going to learn along the way to go for either your educational journey or once you actually get into like the job journey as well. So that's really interesting.
Yeah. It could totally be so different, you know, and there's a bunch of classes that I remember taking that I thought I would like never use. And then they did end up coming into play. Like, for instance, I never thought I would be like anywhere in film, even though I took a bunch of film classes.
Right.
But now I do, or I'm learning more as we're doing videography and stuff for Adventures of Carlienne.
Right.
Even though Carl kind of like mans primarily the videography, and I still kind of head the photography side.
Right.
Yeah.
Nice. Do you from everything that you guys kind of do you still remember some of those fundamentals that came from like those filmography classes and everything?
I would say it's like really different.
Okay.
Because, for example, like the film classes that I took, it's all like fine art, right?
Right.
It's sort of like cinematography and like all the classic films, and even like indie films or like artistic films that are like really long and slow.
Right.
And so it's the complete opposite of like if we're shooting now for YouTube or for people with like a completely different, it's a totally different thing to like shoot for YouTube or to even plan or write for YouTube.
Right.
You know, because it's not a film. Like people aren't coming onto YouTube to watch something that's like an hour or 2 hours long, and they don't have that kind of attention span.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting how the medium itself has changed so much, even within the last couple of years that we've been involved in school and just in different careers. That like, yeah, when you compare YouTube from its very origins in 2005, I think, to where it is now, it's like night and day from like where it started to where it is now, which is pretty crazy.
Yeah, absolutely. Like technology just moves so fast, and it's only going to get faster.
Yeah. Which is the scariest part.
Yeah, it's. I was just thinking the other day about how I can kind of understand that fear during like, say, that people had during like revolution, like industrial revolution.
Yeah.
Times are moving too fast. I'm soon going to be obsolete. Like I don't have necessary skills, or like, oh, I suddenly feel like, you know, like for example, like I had touched on UI UX stuff during school, but now it's like a full-fledged job and career path, and there's a whole set of skills that are required for that. And I'm like, that was just, a short, decade ago. And
Right.
now that's like, can you imagine just another decade from now, like how things will be?
Right. Yeah, my one of my coworkers was actually talking about this last week, where I believe he had said that his I'm pretty sure he said his grandfather. I don't know if it was his father or grandfather, one of those, where they were like a full-time elevator operator, which is insane to me. Like, because it's such a like thing, exactly what you just touched on, where of course nowadays I think only probably like the super fancy hotels have people like that. But to know that like back then it was like a legit like modern full-time job that people would do and would have to be trained on to do it. It wasn't as simple as just like legit just pressing a button and then so
right.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
Yeah. So I think that's going to be us, like, yeah, probably in just 5 years, just because of how fast everything's moving.
Yeah, right. Like I can imagine even like within the next generation that you could easily say like websites would become obsolete and everything would be an app or something.
Right.
Like, and that's crazy. Like,
yeah. It's kind of blowing my mind. Yeah, just because I remember probably the same thing with my college experience of just kind of building my own like website from scratch, and that taking like a few hours or few days or whatever. And then nowadays it's literally you can just pick up any site builder and just literally make it like like really legit.
Yeah. So even for me being a web designer for like 8 years or something like that, and at that time when I started, you had to hire a web designer.
Exactly.
But
yeah.
now there are site builders that you don't need a web designer at all. So it's feeling a little bit like my job will become obsolete.
Yeah.
It basically, you won't need a web designer. You have site builders, but you'll need programmers, obviously.
Exactly.
To, maintain these softwares and whatnot. But it's scary. Yeah.
And even with that, it feels like from some of the designers that I know at my current job or even previous jobs, that it seems like now they do kind of have to have like a hybrid background where they kind of need to know how to code a little bit, need to know how to kind of just do various like smaller jobs that normally like a web designer that we think about 10 years ago wouldn't even have to do. So it's getting kind of scary.
Yeah. Oh man.
I was gonna say this at the beginning of the interview, where I was like, well, this is probably the easiest interview I think I've ever had to do, because I don't have to do that much research on you since we've known each other for so long. That the equivalent I had, it's kind of like we'll probably just kind of do it like when we go to like an ice cream shop and just sample various things. I think that's the equivalent of like how I'm going to treat this interview, where like we're just going to sample everything that you've done throughout your career, because I know we don't have enough time to like cover everything, so we're just going to take like these little like bite-sized samples.
That's such an apt analogy. I'm so glad you said that. Yes, ice cream makes everyone happy. So
and plus we're going to have to talk about ice cream later on.
Yes.
So yeah. But yeah, I think this is probably one of my genuine questions that the reason why I kind of asked this question throughout the podcast to various guests is because I legitly don't know what are my friends' like influences growing up. And so it's always like fascinating to me, because it's either that I never asked or I just kind of forgot, because it's been so long that we talked about like what are our influences when we were first starting off, either our art journey or our careers and everything. But what would you say are some of like your influences? And it could be either overall influences or just like art influences that kind of drove you into the career path you're in now.
I would say they're definitely related. I don't think I could have chosen my path, without the foundation, of course.
Right.
I would say that my biggest influence is definitely like my family, especially growing up. We are all really close. which I'm super, super thankful for. Like I have two brothers, one older, one younger. So I was the middle child, but I was the only girl. So I think that kind of like saved a lot of, it was like a redeeming factor, I think.
Yeah.
Because in our family, we're like the very stereotypical, like the oldest child was sort of the black sheep. The youngest was definitely babied.
Right.
And then the middle child is like super self-sufficient and kind of like would have been completely ignored.
Right.
If not for the fact that I was the only girl.
Yeah. So it's like you balanced everything out.
Yeah. So I think, it was like one of those things where because my brothers, I'll say like required more attention
right.
than I. But because of that, I think I became really like observant and learned a lot like from both, from either one and either situations that happened. So I think that shaped me into being like this kind of more independent kind of, I like to think, watchful person. Yeah. And feeling like that independent person allowed me to kind of like pursue my dreams the way I wanted to. So I think if not for that, like, I wouldn't say like assuredness because I was definitely not that confident growing up. Like I was very timid.
Right.
But there was a part of me that was very used to just like making decisions for myself, and then my dad is like a very pragmatic, like respect is the most important thing to him.
Right.
Because he found that I was like very reliable, even as like a child. Our relationship was that he would often show his trust in me by like giving me responsibilities. Like, on like family trips, like I would be the kid that got to like hold the second key to like the hotel or whatever, the key card or whatever. Or stuff like that, where I would be like, you are responsible. So you get to be in charge of this. Right. So I kind of had that sense of responsibility, like growing up. And, so I always felt like, I know what I'm doing.
Yeah.
Which is why I think that kind of paved the way for me to like feel like, okay, like I like doing this, I like art. I'm going to do this one way or another.
Right.
Even if I'm not allowed to go to art school. I think in terms of art influence growing up, my family themselves are not like necessarily that creative or like artistically driven. Even though there's like my dad's dad was an architect and my mom's mom was like a very crafty person. She did a lot of like, I don't know, I guess you could just call it like Chinese knot, like knotting. And she was like a writer and stuff like that. But unfortunately, I didn't really get to know them very much. So I can't say that I was like influenced by them.
Right.
My real, probably that I can think back on, influence artistically is Sailor Moon.
Oh, yeah. But was it
classic?
But was it Sailor Moon or one of the other Sailor Scouts?
Oh, okay. No, I think Jupiter was my favorite.
Oh, there you go. There. See, I knew it. It had to be Jupiter.
Yeah, of course. But yeah, it was because, so back in the day when people sang karaoke, I don't know if you remember the laser disc.
Oh, of course. Of course. How can you not associate karaoke with the laser disc?
Well, nowadays they have like the magic mic, right? So it's different, but man, the laser disc. Yeah. So basically like when my parents would go to the video rental shop, right?
Yeah.
That was all laser discs and not necessarily VHS, to rent like new karaoke discs. They also had a section for like anime, of course. So my brothers would pick out like a Dragon Ball Z one, and then I would pick out a Sailor Moon one. They were both dubbed in Cantonese. So growing up, I had no idea they were Japanese.
Oh.
Yeah, very interesting.
That's I never even thought about that being dubbed in different languages. Wow. Yeah. So actually the first time that I watched Sailor Moon when they came out with the what was it called?
when they like remastered and
Yeah,
brought
yeah,
back.
yeah.
Yeah. And then I watched it for the first time in Japanese and I was like, oh my God, so different. Like the voices.
Yeah, it's weird because I think I was just kind of like the normal kid that watched it on American TV, so I just heard it in English, and then later on, like in high school when I started taking like Japanese courses, someone would play the original like in full Japanese, and then it would just blow my mind. I'm like, oh my God, these match up so much better.
Yeah, it's like terrible when it's dubbed in English. English is kind of like the worst because it sounds really cheesy. But yeah, so it was Sailor Moon on Laserdisc,
right?
And at the time, my cousin Amy, she is the same age as me, so we hung out a lot. We were like best friends growing up. Amy, she was the one that got me into Sailor Moon, and all of us into Pokemon as well.
Yeah.
So that would be like my first foray into like art because she was really good at drawing. And so we would compete and also just like draw together.
Right.
So we draw Sailor Moon things and we draw like Pokemon stuff, of course. And so that was like the beginning and like the only reason why I started drawing in the first place. And then I would say later on, in high school, I had a really good friend who was like, I would say probably one of the bigger influences artistically or creatively. Sean Paul, he had
the rapper.
No. But he had a really distinct and like beautiful style. And I remember I was super jealous because he's so consistent because he just like drew so much.
Yeah.
And I was like one of those people who like was super inconsistent. Like I didn't have any sort of style and it changed. Even if I wanted to like redraw something the same, I couldn't. I couldn't for the life of me.
Yeah.
So and this was actually something I remember talking to like my art teacher at the time, because when we like sort of in AP art, you like create a portfolio to submit for the AP credits and stuff.
Right.
And I remember saying like, oh, like that's sort of like my struggle because I feel like without a distinct style, it doesn't feel like you're an accomplished artist.
Right.
Yeah. So for me, it was like, because I had so many different interests, like painting, digital, like, and I loved like also wordplay or conceptual art and stuff like that. So I felt like I didn't have a strong portfolio because it was just like a hot mess.
Yeah.
But he was the one who kind of like, because I sat next to him and like I always saw him drawing. So I was like, oh man, like I love how he draw, like the style. And he like, it was like representative of like confidence to me in an artist. Yeah.
It's interesting because I think you and I are very similar in that case, because when I was taking AP art in high school as well, I think I was more on the side of like not painting or drawing these like hyper realistic images, while my other classmates were like fit to like one style where it was like either super hyper realistic or they had like such a like story or backstory behind like one of the pieces that they had done. And then you had like that one kid, there's always one that like is like clearly the best one in the class, but like he was so like independent where half the time he didn't show up to class, half the time he didn't do the assignments, but when he just like did stuff that he wanted to do, it was like unbelievable, just because like it's exactly what you're saying, where like it's so much of like the originality, and at the same time, like when you're motivated to do something, that's where like the art piece is like meaningful, and that's where like it kind of like speaks to us and to him at that point. So he still passed, even though like, he barely did, like he literally did the bare minimum, but like when he did, like when he put on like his so-called like A game, like it was truly like amazing. In that thankfully I'm still good friends with him to this day, and yeah, it's just amazing. Like when we kind of reflect on that, he was like, yeah, I was kind of like a jerk, but I did like at least appreciate that like, yeah, everyone else was more consistent, and that's something that he kind of grew to learn how to do like later on in his life, which it is interesting how all of our journeys are similar but different in many ways.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think it's like the journey of like creative people, right?
Mhm.
It's like, it's kind of the same like undertones.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Mhm.
So yeah, going back to my theory of like, we're just gonna go sample everything in your life and take little snippets here and there. So I know that you also have, of course, from the videos that you and Carl make, that you also have a love and passion for the world of yoga, and I'm very thankful to have been there for your origin story when it came to yoga.
Yeah.
But for everyone listening, did you kind of for everyone listening, do you kind of want to give kind of like your journey with that aspect of your life, where because it's interesting because now people that I know are now with this kind of like spare time that we have now have gotten into like their passion projects or hobbies that they always wanted to do but didn't have the time to do. So some folks have gone into podcasting or yoga as well. But at the time that you had done it, roughly around 2015, what was it about that time in your life where it was kind of like the time to kind of go for it, I guess?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, all related. I came to yoga because it was like after I'd graduated school and I couldn't find a job,
Mhm.
and I really struggled with that because it was like sort of, we were kind of the generation just after
Right.
the generations that were guaranteed jobs out of college.
Yeah.
And so we were kind of that like, hard reality of like, oh, now all of a sudden, because we're the next generation and there's so many more of us.
Mhm.
Yeah. So it was a little bit of like, I'd spent my life kind of like doing all the things I thought I was supposed to do,
Mhm.
and then it not kind of like working out the way you expect it to.
Yeah.
So I had a little bit of like a rough post-graduation, which I'm sure a lot of people can relate to, especially nowadays.
Mhm.
And so when I moved back home, I was like sort of struggling a little bit with like feeling worthy, with feeling like confident about, my value and everything.
Right.
And so sort of as a means to like battle this depression or this depressing state I was in,
Mhm.
I resorted to like, okay, well, I can't control that, so I'm going to control all the things that I can.
Yeah.
And in that sense, I was like, okay, I'm going to put myself on like a routine. I'm going to like stay active and try to like combat this, So then at the same exact time that I was like on this like fitness journey, a yoga studio opened up like right by my house. And because of that, I was like, oh, like I've never done yoga. Like I'm, I'll give it a shot. Like this might just be the thing. And then so like off the bat, I would like go like almost every other day or every day. And because I was there so often and I like got to be pretty good friends with the owner of this studio, and like took her classes and stuff like that. And she was like, after several years, I think it was like three or so years, they finally offered a teacher training program themselves. And then because of that, I took it because it was like, oh, she had, recommended me for it. And she was like, I think you'd be a great teacher and all of that. So, which was funny because at the time I was still very, like personally feeling very timid.
Right.
Even though at that point, I think like 3 years in, I had like, I'd gotten a job and everything and things were okay. But I was like, I could never imagine teaching yoga. And I actually only took teacher training because I wanted to know more about yoga.
Interesting.
And to like understand, like, you know, because I was like, oh, when you go to classes, depending on the type of teachers you have, like some are a lot more informative, but others are, it's kind of like more of like an exercise class where you're like, okay, I make these shapes. I don't know why, but I just do them. And that's, so there was born out of that a curiosity to understand what I was doing. And so I took teacher training, and during that training, you actually also practice like passive voice or like projecting and like presence and all of that stuff, which is like something I like severely needed because I was like, you know, the one whispering
right
like all the time. And that was like always something that like feedback they would give me, like, you need to speak a little louder, like, you know, try to talk to the people at the back of the room, stuff like that. So I think that was just a really important time for me to like find some confidence, some assurance in myself. And and then so by the time we had met and I had started to teach yoga, and you were part of my very first class on my own, which I'm very grateful for, because that definitely was part of what built my confidence in teaching. So, yeah, thanks for being a part of that journey.
Oh, yeah. I vaguely remember the first class, but the one class I'll never forget was the one that what was it, where you had convinced me to try out hot, like a version of hot yoga, where I think it was just like you, me, and maybe one more other person, and I think the surroundings were perfect because I had all the space that I needed, but then like the atmosphere was like the lights were dark and everything. I was like, okay, I'm good. And then all of a sudden, when like the heat actually started like getting turned up, I was like, oh, okay. And then all I remember is that maybe 5 or 10 minutes later, like I knew I was like just sweating buckets at that point. But I think it was one of those things that like it was just something that was completely out the norm for my body and everything. But by the time that like I kind of got used to the temperature and also to the environment, it was probably one of my favorite experiences at the same time, because it really gave me that sense of clarity that I didn't have like a single thought in my head other than just the space I was in at that moment. And I think that was probably like the most enlightenment that I've ever gotten ever. Just because of like, just how my body was like completely transformed at that point, that I think when you kind of got us to go back into like the regular headspace, my mind was like, wow, like that was like I had literally thought I was like in like some amazing like temple for like 20 or 30 minutes, whatever it was, but
yeah. Oh my gosh, that's funny. But it is a like really powerful thing to like feel something so physically that it takes up all of your mental capacity.
Yeah.
Right. Especially nowadays, because we're so used to like multitasking
right.
Being online or this like, you know, ether world, basically, that to like, you know, super feel your body and to feel like when you're sweating and to feel like your pores open, to feel like, oh my God, like hyper aware of your body. Yeah, that can be like such a different experience from what we are used to on the daily.
Yeah. And I think it's also the thing too that I think I'm similar in your case, where I was definitely very timid during that time. Probably the last 10 years, where whenever I would do anything that required like exercising in any format, whether it's like running or cycling, I just wasn't like confident in that, just because it was one of those things where it's like a shared environment. So if I went to a gym, the same kind of feeling that a lot of people have, like where they feel like body shaming or whatever, but with just like the whole yoga experience, it was something that I found intimidating at first, but I think based on like how you and I were close friends, and then just having that confidence that I knew I could that I could trust everything that you would do. It put me into that comfort zone that once I started actually contributing and started being a part of the classes more frequently, that it just felt like, I didn't feel like any timid. I wasn't timid at that point, that I really just went to actually do the activity. That I wasn't aware of my surroundings at that point in a good way, I should say.
Oh, I'm so glad to hear that. Yes. Because, yes. I mean, I totally understand it. And I'm uncomfortable in gyms. Even as like a yoga practitioner or a teacher, like I could feel that way going to a yoga class, even now, but to find a class or a place or people where you can feel welcome and that you can feel supported is so powerful. And that's what kind of drew me to yoga. I know that mainstream yoga can be very intimidating and has in fact a lot of body shaming, which is like kind of sad because it's supposed to be like the complete opposite.
Right.
The reality is, of course. But I think that hopefully for the majority of folks and for the majority of those teaching, that they're guiding people to find that confidence and to be like, like I'm here for me. Like this is about me. This isn't about other people. And this is not so much about like changing my body as like I'm learning about my body. I'm learning to become comfortable in my body, or I'm learning like how cool and awesome my body is because I never knew I could do these things because for the longest time, I had been in the way of that because I had assumed or thought all of these things, you know?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
It's interesting that I think it's one of those things that you kind of just grow with experience on like where you feel comfortable the most, whether it be in like a social environment or if it's something that you practice on your own. And then just kind of seeing everything that's been happening recently with shelter in place, that people can kind of find the community that they're the most comfortable in, whether it be like in the kind of like yoga world or gaming now with people like kind of just playing games online. Like as long as it's an environment and a community that they feel comfortable in, and like that's where they kind of like can go to escape for however long that they want to be in there. Yeah. Awesome. Well, speaking of video games and other stuff that people love doing, we'll definitely get to Adventures of Carlienne in a little bit. But I did want to ask, like, what are some of your hobbies? And we've kind of briefly talked about this with Sailor Moon and the amazing animes that we watch. But what are some of your hobbies when you're not like participating in your projects or like any of your kind of like work, like your full-time work duties, I guess?
Yeah. We definitely touched on them, like anime, like watching things. I wasn't always like a big movie or TV show watcher. Like growing up, I was definitely like a reader. So reading is still one of my favorites, like anything like fantasy, sci-fi. I've been into like a lot of like dystopia and horror lately, which is because of a good friend of mine. I would have never thought I would like it.
Right.
But it makes sense because I did watch a lot of like Criminal Minds, Dexter, kind of, like murder mystery kind of stuff, like a lot of psychology stuff. Always a fan. Gaming, yes, video games. I used to play a lot of RPGs like back on PlayStation 1 and 2 and 3. But basically after that, kind of stopped.
Yeah.
Because I never got a PS4 or 5 or anything.
Yeah.
But we are talking about eventually getting a PS5. So
whenever they're available.
Yeah, maybe by then that will be a good time to jump back into. It's just hard to like decide to commit like 60 plus hours to something right now.
Yeah. totally understand that feeling.
But then again, I'm watching Korean dramas now, and those are huge time investments too. So I think it's probably even.
Yeah.
But yeah, other than that, I also really, my younger brother is like a board game collector, connoisseur type of person. So we actually play a lot of games like within our family, which has been like a super great thing during COVID.
Right.
Because it, one, you can be social amongst each other and like work together. Especially because he prefers like co-op games,
right?
Which I'm really glad, because I hate like super highly competitive ones where you're like saboteur, where you're sabotaging each other.
Yeah.
Because games like that can totally like ruin your relationships.
I've definitely seen it with there was, this one's more of a video game, but I don't know if you've ever heard of the game Overcooked.
Yes,
yeah,
I love Overcooked.
Yeah. So I've seen that not destroy, but just like cause domestic fights with with spouses, co-workers. It's one of those games that it should just be for fun, but then when you kind of see like the relationship builder part, then you're kind of like, well, you kind of see how someone's relationship is with someone else at that point.
Yes, that's so true. I love that you brought that up, because that is a perfect example. Yeah, Carl and I played Overcooked, and it's our favorite game to play together. And we definitely had like other friends, like a couple friends that played it, and we played with them, and we could just like, we're like, you should really like choose your companions carefully, because yes, you're right. Like it can make or break people. And I think at the end of the day, we realize like it's so telling. Like it's basically a communications test, as with all things relationships.
Right.
But it was like, could you communicate? And the funny thing is, or maybe because Carl and I have actually worked together in a kitchen, like we know how to communicate about like tasks. And of course, that's also why we like work together now, because we're really good at working together.
Yeah.
So that's why we are a rare pair that love the game.
As long as you're not throwing the food on the floor like how you do it in the game in order to like, then I think you guys are good at that point.
Yes, Overcooked is definitely one. I would say I love games like Overcooked versus like Among Us, which is like super popular right now, because it is fun to be like the sabotaging person, but then it does create some distrust, like, and that can carry on beyond the game.
Yeah. It starts getting a little too close to home at that point.
Yeah, so all the like sort of board games that we're playing together is like super fun. I love that. I love like strategy and just sort of, it's a way to use your brain right now without feeling like you're trying to use your brain.
Yeah. That's awesome.
And then I think in terms of video games, all I'm playing are like just some like a couple of PC games. Like I was trying to go through Hades. I don't know if you've heard of it, but it's like a dungeon crawler, and it's Greek mythology based. So because I love the mythology, so my brother recommended the game, but I really don't like dungeon crawlers. I don't like the endless runs and the dying and like not getting very far.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then other than that, I love, reading. And then I used to also write a lot, not so much recently, other than like the blog posts.
Right.
Like creative writing, not as much.
It's still writing at that point.
Thank you. And then I also dance hula and oritahiri.
Oh, yeah. That's right.
Yeah. And then, of course, yoga. And I love in general, like being outside. Like we try to go hiking and play tennis and stuff like that. Playing tennis is also how Eugenia and I bond.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And then, of course, Kachang, the puppy.
Yeah.
Just playing with her and training her.
Yeah. That's awesome. And I think that's probably the best segue I can think of is with Kachung leading into the adventures of Carlienne. So first of all, I think I may have said this a long time ago, but just so the world can hear it, I definitely wanted to congratulate you and Carl on just like doing such an amazing or just being like amazing content creators overall, just because of the professionalism and the high production that you guys put into like every aspect of it. Not just the videos, but I think what a lot of people don't kind of like, the things that people don't see are just kind of the stuff that you do with like the overall branding of everything when it comes to like the website and like how you just said, like with even like the copywriting. I think that's a lost art form in itself, where like people think it's just literally like, oh yeah, just write down whatever, but like you kind of have to put some thought into that. So like I definitely want to make sure that doesn't get lost as well.
Thank you. Yeah, that means a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah, Carl is definitely the one pushing our quality, and he's his competitive drive keeps us
yeah. So
pushing forward.
So with that, yeah, like I think I roughly know the story, but just for everyone else, like where did that kind of stem from? Like what was the original idea to kind of create this between you and Carl? Like was it one day that you kind of worked on something, or collectively did you just think that, oh, we're going to just start kind of making this content?
It stemmed from our trip, our decision to go on the year-long around the world trip. Basically, we I have a photography background, and Carl has a bit of a videography background. So when we started researching and planning for our trip, we did come across other, vloggers, other travel kind of influencers. It was still, I wouldn't say like in the beginning, because it's probably like the mid peak of travel vlogging. And so because we basically used those vloggers or those bloggers as resources for our trip planning. And so we sort of saw them and we were like, you know what, we should probably also document our trip.
Right.
Not necessarily expecting it to become anything, but because we just wanted to document it just in case.
Right.
And then we kind of were like, well, okay, let's actually, why don't we try and make it a thing? And then we'll just see if anything happens out of it.
Right.
And so that's kind of the birth of Adventures of Carlienne. We started via the travel. And then, of course, when we came back, we introduced cooking stuff because Carl's background as a chef and just my general love of food.
Right.
Professional eater. No, I'm kidding.
I'm pretty sure that's a job title I saw on your LinkedIn. So I think it's official.
It's one of my top skills. The greatest amount of experience. But yeah, so then we introduced the cooking, and then also, of course, during the back end of the traveling, we also introduced some of my yoga, and we decided to, despite convention of oh, you need to find your niche, and then that way you can grow faster. But that's kind of our, our personal philosophies, is that we are definitely multidisciplinary, and we don't do just one thing. We've never been able to just do one thing. Right. So that became our sort of motto, that, we're not going to just have a single oriented channel, but that the brand would be about, our entire lifestyle, all of our hobbies, and really embracing each and every single passion that we had, and to basically represent that little, it's okay. You don't have to box yourself in. And, for all of the other people who are also interested in, starting lifestyle vlogs or blogs or channels or whatever platform you're using, that it's totally okay,
Yeah. I think that's the thing that makes you guys very unique, is just because of the various disciplines that you guys have and hobbies and everything, that it's, it kind of makes it where you kind of give people the opportunity to see like what they're most interested in, as opposed to just being like sticking to one thing, how you said. Like if it was just like a traveling vlog, then maybe some people are not really into that. But the fact that you offer like cooking and then yoga and various other content, I think that's the thing, is like people can find something that they're interested in, and then they're like, oh, that's pretty cool. And then I guess it's kind of the same way of like when we were talking about yoga overall. It's like maybe I wasn't comfortable with like knowing how to cook, but based on like if I'm watching your content for the yoga, and then I see like, oh, they're actually having so much fun doing like the cooking stuff, I'll give that a try too. And then if they start getting the information that you guys do, which is amazing information on each video, by the way, that at that point too, yeah, you might open up something that maybe someone was intimidated by doing or just never thought of themselves doing. And then, yeah, like right there, that they can try something completely new that they would have never done before. So I think that's probably the amazing part that I really like about your guys' stuff.
Oh, thanks. No, I'm so glad you said that, because that definitely touches on, actually, Carl and I were talking about this just today, about how, we envision ourselves kind of like, if you take our channel to be like our home, like our house.
Ah, that's a good analogy.
Like we want to be a place where people just like, oh, like, I wonder what they're up to today. Like, I want to go over there, hang out, and just like see what they're doing.
Right.
Like, and then maybe stay for dinner.
Like, yeah. Like, literally.
Yeah, like literally. So it's, that sort of permission to dabble and to like try something new. And, so often we are also trying something for the first time, and just like sharing whatever we're learning, our experiences. And I think that, if somebody can come and like learn something, or even just be like what you said, be inspired to try something for the first time, I think we would be so grateful, and we would be like thrilled that our work or our content or whatever it is capable of doing that. Yeah.
And I think that's the thing too. It's where it's interesting as content creators, and kind of how you mentioned with Carl being like the focus of keeping things like at a certain quality level. I think that's probably the one thing that I am always interested in when I talk to like my other artist friends too, of like, when you start something, how do you go about doing it where you obviously have like a bar of quality that you want to keep, but when you start working, like, for example, on like a different series, like what you guys have with either the cooking or the yoga content, when you start creating something new, where, as artists, like, I think that's the hardest part, is like, where do you kind of say like, okay, it's done, but it's like done for this, but it's not like done overall, because in your head, that you always want to like keep working on it or improve it. But how do you kind of like say that something's like done for that moment, or for that,
yes.
or for that video, I guess?
Ooh, yes. The struggle of the artist, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's two things. It's the blank canvas.
Yeah.
And then it's when are you done? Yes.
Exactly. Yeah.
That's the struggle. You can't start and then you can't stop.
Yeah. Exactly.
I don't know. I think definitely in terms of, I think because our core platform is YouTube, that kind of creates a little bit of a, like, it's better to be done, because we know that like basically the way content is consumed at such a like kind of fast, and we're not putting out a featured film, right? So in that sense, sometimes we're like, you know what, that's okay. Like, yes, we messed up on that, and maybe like I said it wrong, and it's just a little text edit. Like, it's okay. We don't have to reshoot it.
Exactly. Yeah.
Like, there's a certain understanding of like the platform and just like expectations, I think, for that platform that kind of, I guess, lend itself to like, it's more important to put something out. And, and we always talk about like, it's hard to watch our older videos.
Right.
It's just like you cringe because you're like, oh my God, like I was so proud of that.
Yeah.
And now I'm like horrified. But I think like coming from like an art background too, I look at it like, well, that's your portfolio, but that's also like evidence of your growth, right?
Right, exactly.
So we could technically hide all of those old videos and then let no one see anything except for like our last, whatever, handful of them. But I think that part of our brand is also, of course, again, like I was saying, like it's, giving permission for people to learn. So I think it's important to show like, at some point we started here.
Yeah.
And to show the journey is like more important. So I think even though, and of course, like just technicality wise, like our equipment got better as we, later in time, as we were able to get different things or to learn techniques, and even, like trends in terms of like editing trends on YouTube, things that we are watching and we are being inspired by, and then we're learning to do or copy or whatever. Yeah. Whether it's like transitions or like lighting styles or whatever. So I think it's just been about our constant learning and constant like influences.
Yeah. I think that's, even for me, like that's the hardest thing to go by is like, do I kind of follow what's the trend or just kind of stick to my playbook? And I think it's just a matter of taste, and it's also a matter of like what it is you're producing. So with that, I totally agree with you, where it's like you want to kind of erase the past sometimes, but at the same time, yeah, like when you look back at it, you're like, oh, like there's that charm to it too when you kind of look back on it. And if it's either just an audio format or if it's both audio and video, that you do kind of appreciate like, oh wow, like that was literally only like 2 or 3 years ago that I did that, compared to like what I'm doing now. It's very interesting to see like that growth in like whatever it is you're doing with your hobbies or in this case, like with your content, which is pretty cool.
Yeah. And the other thing I wanted to mention was like sort of because, for example, like YouTube being the platform, or in general, most platforms now, it's not necessarily about polish. I mean, it like, of course, if you're trying to land like commercial gigs or like try to get sponsorships, of course, you need a level of professionalism.
Yeah.
But in terms of like general audience, like entertainment is a much bigger factor. So in fact, like my younger brother is thinking about starting a YouTube channel.
Oh,
and
nice.
So we were kind of like talking him through this stuff, and like he did like his first like recording session with us, and he was like, just, oh my God, like it's so hard. And how do you guys do it? And I was like, well, we're like 200 videos in, like it's taking us a long time to get here.
Yeah.
But the other thing is like, now that we sort of have this experience, we are also like, you know what? It's better to mess up and then play off of your mistakes, because that adds personality and that adds like entertainment value. Like if you can make fun of yourself when you mess up, like people like that so much more than if you didn't mess up and you just had like a clean take,
right? And
you were great, but then you're not memorable, So there's something to say about like, that's kind of like what is allowed on YouTube. Like people are more value the entertainment and the personality much more. So it's okay to not be perfect. And like,
yeah. And I think it's kind of those things where like, of course we've probably kind of trimmed things down for editing purposes and for time purposes. But it's interesting how you said like that. You can see that organicness even when things are slightly edited, compared to like if you watch any game show on like Fox or whatever, where like it seems like it's overproduced, where none of it seems genuine. That I think that's what builds that disconnect, is because it just looks too overpolished versus YouTube and YouTube content creators that they have some presentation and polish, but it's not to that point where it's like they just look like they're fake or not being genuine to what they're talking about.
Mhm. Yeah, that's a good point. Like YouTube is not the same as TV,
Mhm.
right? Like there is definitely a different expectation. And like YouTube was supposed to be about the everyman, being able to broadcast himself. So it's like very different to be like, well, if all of a sudden you feel like super commercial, it's cool, but then people don't feel like they know you.
Right.
And YouTube is like this place where it's more about the community and like knowing people and like being like, oh, like I'm a fan of you, not just your show, right? Because they get to see you. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I think I've left some podcasts where like my friend and I were probably like laughing for like a minute straight, and I was like, should I trim this? Yeah, I'll just leave it in.
No, I think, especially like laughing parts, because people like need that bit of joy. Like when you hear other people laughing, it makes you smile. Like you can't help it.
Yeah.
Or when you see other people smile and stuff, like you just want, so like I feel like especially nowadays, like we need more of that in our lives. So
totally agree. And another thing that we need more in our life, because I knew I was going to get back to it, is ice cream. So
yes.
Before we get into our last question, I definitely wanted to make sure that we have something on the record where we have our favorite ice cream recommendations.
Ooh, as in flavors or like creameries?
I'm gonna for time purposes. See, it's going full circle. I will say top 3 or 5, whichever one you want to do, of either your favorite brand of ice cream or your favorite flavors. Either one, or you can do a mix of the two.
Okay. Not in order.
Okay.
I'll say, I like our very own coffee ice cream. We call the flavor latte because we did 2 because we did this experiment using either whole coffee beans versus ground coffee beans, and doing the ground obviously gives it a lot more coffee flavor. But if you don't use ground beans, it is a little bit of a waste, but the flavor of the coffee is milder and the milkiness comes out, so you get more of like a latte flavor. So both of them are really, really good, and that's probably the favorite of the flavors that we are able to make ourselves. Then one of my favorite childhood vanilla ice cream flavors was the Haagen-Dazs vanilla fudge. They do not make it anymore.
Oh no!
But what it used to be was like vanilla, right? But they swirled like hot fudge in the ice cream, and it stayed like fudgy and melty. And everyone always tried to like scoop out all the fudge and leave it. Yeah. But they don't make that flavor anymore. So
can you like track down the recipe or anything or no?
Oh, we are working on a fudge.
Okay.
But so far we have been unsuccessful in keeping it fudgy. So we're still working on that. But another like go-to favorite flavor of mine would be Ben & Jerry's chocolate fudge brownie. And actually that's something that Carl and I do, is like we always try every single Ben & Jerry's flavor that they come out with.
Oh, nice.
So that's something. Yeah. So we've tried pretty much all of them that I know of. And then every time we see that they've like got new ones, or we go to like Target and go check if they have like, because Target actually has a lot of their like limited or exclusive flavors.
Oh, right. That's right. Yeah.
So trick for those of you that are also on this journey with us.
Yeah.
So Ben & Jerry's. And then in terms of local creameries, Tin Pot is like really great.
Yeah.
Pretty expensive, but worth the splurge once in a while.
Right.
And then also Salt and Straw.
Ooh,
that started from Portland,
good pick,
or Oregon.
Yeah.
I think those are like my top. I don't even know how many I said. Sorry.
Oh no. I think, like I said, this could have just been like a whole podcast in itself.
Totally.
To be really honest about it. I think that's one of my excuses, like before shelter in place, to just go visit Eugenia. I mean, she's cool and like Ellie's cool and all, but she lives right next to a Tin Pot, so at the same time,
yeah, it's like, oh, I happen to be in the neighborhood, Eugenia, because I was at Tin Pot, so
yeah. I'm glad that we're on the same page there.
Yes, absolutely.
Awesome. So yeah, I wanted to get into our last questions for just making sure I respect your time as well. So the last question I usually like to ask friends who join us for the podcast is based on everything, especially in your case, since I know you work on various projects. What has been one of your, or it could be, I'll ask this in a different way. It could be a personal project, or it could be a collaborative, or you can have one of each. Like, what has been one of your favorite personal projects and collaborative projects that you've worked on within the last couple of years?
It was a really good question, really hard for me. I would say I couldn't think of a recent personal project because everything in my recent life has been pretty collaborative, whether it's like at work or even with adventures. Obviously, that's all collaborative. So I think that just in general, some favorite projects have been was the Confessions podcast that we were working on prior to COVID.
Yeah.
It made me realize like how much I like having sort of like a more intentional conversation with folks, and just the idea that we could share those perspectives and those like little nuggets of wisdom that everyone always has,
right?
With the world, like made me feel super satisfied.
Yeah.
And then I think just, of course, I don't know if that's like too obvious or cliche, but like Adventures of Carlienne is like the baby project of mine because I've always loved doing like branding for whether it was like at work for other companies or whomever. But my favorite part of anything is always like that storytelling, like figuring out what people are about and what they want other people to know about them and like crafting that. So with Adventures of Carlienne, it was like, that was, of course I got to like complete control over that storytelling, but to like work with Carl and like think about like, oh, what it is like, I don't think I ever really got to go so in depth, even like when I had my own like art brand,
right?
When I was like for like freelancing and all of that. But to do that like and it's probably because with Adventures of Carlienne, it's like something that I work on daily, so that's much more like ingrained or like invested
right.
Into that. But that to create the brand and then like even like the illustrations or to do the graphics, like in a way that was like is my personal project now, since that's like primarily what I do. But I would say it's probably like the most satisfying project that I've had in a long time. So yeah.
It's really awesome because even just talking to you this past hour, it does seem like, based on that, from everything you kind of just said, it does seem like it's pretty much like a collective of everything that you've done throughout your whole life, which is pretty amazing when you think about it. And I think that's why it does kind of translate on film when you guys do the various videos, because I see it too when it comes to like the production of just seeing like the graphics for it, and then like the cinematography, the food, obviously, that it all kind of comes together, and it is literally like how you and Carl just said, where it's like kind of having like a piece of you, like of like your home that everyone gets to see, and it does seem like it's unbelievably rewarding to see that kind of pay off when like people do get inspired from it. So I think it's just amazing that you get to work on something that you truly love doing.
Yeah, I think it is. It makes all the difference, Otherwise, I don't think we could do this all the time.
Yeah. Awesome. So I will sneak in one last bonus question, because I don't know if anyone's asked you this. I'm pretty sure they have, but why is it not Adventures of Adri Carl?
If it's not obvious, that it would be a little bit awkward of a name. I think it was, because when we made that up, it was like when people were still giving like couple nicknames.
Yeah.
So that was, of course, from that. Otherwise, it's so cheesy now that I think about it. It's like, ugh. But now it's stuck, and I think it was just the easier way, because starting with my name is like Adrienne in itself is like a really awkward name. I don't know. I've always felt awkward about my name.
I'm the same way with mine, so that's why I always like trim it down whenever I can.
Okay. Yeah. Even like when I introduce myself, I always feel awkward. For a long time as a kid, like saying my own name, I felt like I was always tripping over it. So at any rate, it was just starting with like Adriarl would be kind of weird too. So it was just like, okay, you know what? Carlienne sounds nice, even though it'd be great, like ladies first, whatever.
Exactly.
But, it works out that way. So
I just thought it was going to be where like you decided based on who would win in like a triathlon or something like it's like, okay, whoever wins best out of 3, then it can determine like who goes first.
That would be a much more like epic story, but I'm not as competitive as he is, so I would not win at anything.
Awesome. This has been amazing, and like I said, like the reason why we're probably going to split this into 3 separate parts is just because like there's so much to cover with you and Carl that I literally, as the cliche goes, I think we've only touched the iceberg with this conversation. But definitely in the future we're gonna have Carl, and then we'll bring everyone full circle and kind of have like a big group discussion. But before we headed off, I definitely wanted to make sure that people were aware of like how to kind of reach out to you and to kind of know where to kind of find everything. So if you wanted to plug anything specific or give any specific shout outs, I definitely wanted to give you the opportunity for that.
Oh, yeah, definitely appreciate that. I think just finding us on our website, adventuresofcarlienne.com, is like central. You can find all of everything else basically on there. But we're definitely most active on YouTube. So if you can find us there, Adventures of Carlienne as well. That's basically where to find most of our stuff. Yeah.
Nice. Any upcoming things in the works?
We have a lot of stuff in the works. Of course, like our travel podcasts, for those who are interested or dreaming of traveling again, hopefully soon. Definitely invite you to listen in on that. Otherwise, we're doing a lot of experiments in the kitchen. And we're going to start another series of yoga. We just finished a series that was like really personal for me, yoga for self-awareness. So we just finished that, and we'll have several other ones like quick morning yoga series, and then also yoga for discipline, because that's something I am working on right now.
Oh, nice.
So look forward to that.
I can definitely recommend the latest one because it has everyone's favorite Kachung making her. What was it? Her debut? Or,
oh yeah, yes.
Yeah. I'm so jealous because I could not do that with my boys because they literally just are so curious where they're just moving around all the time. And she was like an angel in that video where she just stayed in her spot the entire time.
It was rare. I will tell you that. That's why I was like surprised. And we only attempted it because it was a shorter segment. If it were a long one, I wouldn't keep her there. So.
Like she was perfect. Like she could have literally just like, I wouldn't be surprised if she just kind of has her own spin-off series now.
I know.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us. And yeah, like you mentioned, I'll definitely put the links in the video description so everyone can check you out. But thank you again for making the time to do this. And of course, we're hopefully going to do this pretty soon again in the near future. So thanks again for stopping by.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Awesome. Thanks again, everybody, for listening, and we will see you next time. Take care.
Bye.
Thanks again for watching. If you enjoyed the conversation, don't forget to like and subscribe.